Hey ladies and gentlemen, Christoph the Polish Geek, and welcome to another movie review. Yes, back pretty fast, and this time I'm reviewing a movie that I didn't know almost anything about until I just started hearing things about it, and that's Godzilla Minus One. And that movie was simply excellent. Like, I didn't know anything about that this movie was coming out. I've seen no trailers for it or anything. And yet, I just found out this movie is coming out, and then I looked up some information and found out that this is actually a movie produced by the Japanese, which makes sense considering original old Godzilla movies were actually Japanese movies. Plus also, I've been hearing so many positive things about it, and the fact that this movie will be set after World War II, like the original Godzilla, and all of that combined made me so curious. So I just went to see it, and I have to say the movie was simply phenomenal. It's certainly my favorite modern Godzilla movie, but it's probably actually my favorite Godzilla movie of all time, which is saying a lot. Before we start talking about the movie though, I will also say that this movie made me really hungry to revisit some very old school Godzilla movies, like some of my favorite ones, like the original Godzilla from the 50s, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla vs. Destroyer, Godzilla vs. Gigan, or Godzilla vs. Hedorah, or the final one, Godzilla Final Wars. I remember how I really loved all those movies in my childhood, so yes, this movie made me really hungry to revisit them, and I actually might after I do this review. But now let's talk about this actual phenomenal movie first. And there is so much to talk about this movie. The first thing I will say is how phenomenal Godzilla looked in this movie. Like, I heard this movie was a pretty low budget, much lower budget than any movie in the Monsterverse, and yet I thought Godzilla simply looked phenomenal, natural, realistic, much better than a lot of modern CGI. Which is really shocking, considering how, as I said, this movie was a pretty low budget, and yet Godzilla looks simply much better than the vast majority of modern CGI, and certainly way better than Godzilla or any other monster in the modern Monsterverse. Though what I like most about this movie, and what really most impressed me about it, is because before I saw it, I heard how this movie was much more character-driven than monster movies. Because let's face it, most monster movies, especially Monsterverse movies, but even movies that are not part of Monsterverse universe, generally nowadays, monster movies are just nothing more than a giant monster destroying a city and nothing else. But I heard this movie was far more character-driven, but when I actually watched it, I was really impressed with how, like, I already knew it was going to be more character-driven, but I didn't know it was going to be so character-driven. Like, I'm really impressed with the impressive character arcs and how well the characters were crafted and how many layers they had to them. Like, it almost feels like Godzilla rampaging the city was very much secondary. Like, this is first and foremost a complex character-driven movie. And as I said, the character arcs and the depth and the interactions they had with each other was just so awesome, so impressive. I was just impressed because I don't ever think I've seen a monster movie that was so deeply and richly character driven, and it was so full of heart. The main character of the movie is this pilot Koichi, and the movie starts how all his friends get killed by Godzilla and he's the only survivor, and he feels so guilty about it. He has this character's guilt, and then a few years later, after the war is over, he starts the relationship with this girl, Noriko, and they have an adopted daughter whose parents were killed by the bombings in World War II. And their family life is just so interesting, so touching. And it's not just Koichi and his girlfriend and adopted daughter that are so interesting. Like, there are plenty of supporting characters in this movie that are also very well crafted and have so much deep and layers to them, like this scientist Kenji, who comes up with a plan of how to defeat Godzilla, and there is also this mechanic Sosaku, who blames Koichi on the death of his companions. And all the interactions those characters have with each other are just so interesting, and you just enjoy watching those conversations. Like, I didn't find those conversations boring at all. I was actually so interested and glued to the screen through those conversations because, as I just said, I knew that this movie was going to be far more character driven than most monster movies, but I didn't know it was going to be to that extent. Like, it's probably a much more character driven movie than many modern movies nowadays. Like, and as I said, you just care about those characters so much, and you're just so interested in what happens to them, and their arcs are so wonderful and believable and perfectly make sense in the context of the movie. I also really love how this movie decided to revisit the roots of what Godzilla is, because almost all the current Godzilla movies, even one back from like the early 2000s movie, all those movies take place in like the modern day, but this instead decided to revisit the roots and go back to World War II and reveal that Godzilla was a result of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And in some ways you can make an argument this movie is basically a sequel to Oppenheimer, since Oppenheimer was about the creation of atomic bomb and this is sort of about the results of an atomic bomb. So I guess you can argue this movie is in some ways a sequel to Oppenheimer. But I really love how this movie decided to revisit the roots, and also I think World War II setting in some ways makes tension so much higher, because when you set the Godzilla movie in a modern day, then they have the much better technology to fight the giant monster. But because this is set in World War II, when technology was far less advanced, and because Japan suffered such a devastating defeat in World War II, for them it was basically even much harder to defend themselves against such a monster. And this movie very much takes this to its advantage, and it's actually very much shown in the story. I thought this was so well done. Like, this is certainly a best modern Godzilla movie I ever seen. It's actually possibly best Godzilla movie ever, because although the original Godzilla from the 50s, it's still a very good movie, but if we are being honest, it kind of aged badly. But this is like a Godzilla from the 50s from the modern day. I mean, I haven't seen Shin Godzilla. I've been hearing some good things about it, although I've never seen it. But I might try out this movie if I see if there is any way to get hold of it and watch it. But so far, this is certainly a best modern Godzilla movie, and very possibly best Godzilla movie ever made, actually. But I'll certainly have to go and see this movie several more times before I ultimately make up my mind what's the best Godzilla movie. But this certainly is a very likely candidate, and this is certainly possibly one of the best movies of 2023, because this movie is phenomenal. It has so much heart. The characters are so great and have so many layers to them, and their arcs are simply phenomenal. I really loved Godzilla Minus One. It's certainly the best modern Godzilla movie ever, and possibly even best Godzilla movie ever, but you totally should see Godzilla Minus One. This movie truly deserves your attention. It's awesome. You really should see Godzilla Minus One, and I will totally go and see it again. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for checking out this video. Please press the like button, go see Godzilla Minus One if you can, and please subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you soon in another video. Talk to you later, bye!